Are you ready to learn and play the most unexploitable, balanced form of poker known for multi-table tournaments today? That's right, in this video you're going to learn game theory optimal strategies, pre-flop ranges, what to do on the flop, what to do on the turn, and what to do on the river, and how to make sure that you are balancing out your bluffs and your value. Now, make sure that you stay all the way to the end because we pull all of these theories together in practical forms of homework that you can do to ensure that these lessons stick. Now, this is part two of 5, so make sure that you're already brushed up on part 1, and if you're just wanting to learn GTO, let's jump straight in. Let's go. Before jumping straight into this, do both this channel and yourself a favor. That way you're getting all of the content within this 5-part series boot camp, but also additional training that goes along with it by clicking like and subscribe right down below, and click the notification bell. Every time a brand new series or a brand new video comes out, you'll be first to know on that subscription. It also goes far to help support this channel too. Now, once you've done that, there are instructions right down below on joining the Discord server, introducing yourself, reading through the welcome and rules, and then getting coached on this entire material. This is probably the most difficult in the series to figure out how to implement, and it is our pleasure in the BeTheShark crew to help you implement it in a sound, fundamental way so you can turn your poker passion into a profitable one. So go ahead, like, subscribe right down below, and let's jump into the presentation of unpacking GTO in today's multi-table tournament world. Unpacking GTO in today's multi-table tournament. So remember, this is the low stakes MTT bootcamp, part 2 of 5. And if you haven't already seen part 1, that's okay. If you're only wanting to get into GTO, you can just follow this video. But I do highly recommend, if you don't just go back and watch it now, that you go out after this video and start going through this entire series, because in the modern game, GTO is not just enough to play. You do have to play the mix of GTO, deviating for population, deviating for the different types of players that you want to exploit at the table in order to really thrive. Now, if you play a GTO style, you will probably wind up getting very deep very often in most tournaments, but you probably won't accumulate chips to a point where you can win a lot. So this is a good foundation, but it's not the be-all, end-all. Remember that and keep that in mind as we start going through this. Let's jump straight in. So game theory optimal defined, and we can read it here, is the theoretical optimal approach to poker, designed to make your play balanced so no one can consistently exploit your strategy. It's even more critical in this day and age of poker playing, where stack depths start to vary, player capabilities start to vary, and increased variance starts to go up compared to cash games due to all of these differing factors that come in through each stage of MTT play, that you have a good foundation that can't be exploited. GTO makes sure that you're balanced, unexploitable, and you're most effective against a broad range of opponents. And you're going to experience a very broad range, probably more so in multi-table tournaments than you will in cash games, which have a tendency for you to sit there for a couple of hours and have relatively the same players that you're going to play against, as opposed to getting moved in and out, as opposed to having 100 big blinds or 200 big blinds at the same stack depth. Now, it is important, unlike a cash game,
that you vary how you play based on the size of your stack and what stage of the tournament that it's in. So if you're short, mid, or deep stack, it's going to make a very big difference. If you're near the money or completely outside of the money at each of these stacks, it's going to make a very big difference. And what GTO does is creates the most sound, fundamental approach to give you a way to build a really good MTT poker playing game. Think of it like this. You got all your cool creative strategies like check raising, that crazy maniac that just can't help but bluff, or ensuring that you're getting value out of that calling station that just cannot fold top pair when you've made a straight, but you got to know exactly what to bet. Those are all kind of like icing on the cake, but you need your foundation. You need the cake to put all of the icing and all the fun, frilly, beautiful things on top of it. And that's what GTO is. Maybe even better analogy is you need a good foundation to build a skyscraper. But if you have a rotten foundation, you can't build a 100-story high skyscraper without it crumbling beneath you. GTO is going to be that foundation. And let's jump straight in to... You're going to get different phases where you have to understand how to play GTO. You start pre-flop, then you go to the flop, the turn, and then the river. But everything, 70% of poker is usually played, 70 to 80% is played pre-flop and sometimes a flop. You're going to see a lot fewer turns and rivers, but you have to make sure you're always going to have a decision pre-flop. 100% of the time, unless you're sitting out and you walked away from the table, you're having to make a decision based off of these factors that you see here pre-flop as to what hands to start or not to start. So some of the things that you have to consider. How many chips do you have? And in fact, I would only make it this difficult when you're studying. Follow my cursor real quick. 50 big blinds, I would look at 50 big blinds all the way up to 200 as relatively the same because there's just too many stack depths to even worry about the difference between 200 and 100 big blinds. So 50 plus. Then you start looking at 30 to 49 big blinds. It's still deep stacked, but it isn't quite as deep. And you actually can open more hands than if you were as deep as 50 plus. We can talk about that in a later video. Then you start looking at 15 to 29 big blinds, which we call this the rejam stack. And this is where you know that if you're going to come in, you're probably going to be all in by the river, or you're going to need to be playing a really aggressive style. And you can imagine if you know you're going to wind up being all in, again, your pre-flop ranges are going to change. Then we look at 14 to 11, which are almost guaranteed that you're going to be all in. We do have some raise folds here, and that's kind of why we keep the stack depth there. But then once you have gotten down under 10 big blinds, it is pretty much all in or fold unless everybody else at the table is under 10 big blinds. Then at each one of these stack depths, you want to determine, are you utilizing chip EV? Or basically there's no money pressure, so you're only looking at the value of your hand of trying to win versus your opponent's range. And then second, at each stack depth, when ICM pressure, which is independent chip model, and this basically makes it very simple to determine when money starts becoming a factor, what you should and shouldn't be playing, what is more valuable. And as you'll notice here, we've broken down each one of these into very easy to study chunks. So when you're putting in the effort and the energy to put in pre-flop work in GTO, you know you're going to have ranges very similar to this. Now, How do they change with each one of these factors? This is 20, these charts are both 25 big blinds. This chart here on the left is chip EV, no money pressure involved, 25 big blinds. And if you notice, blue is going to be your fold range. Green is your complete range, or when you bring it in, or what we call limp. And red is going to be your raise range, or the hands that you voluntarily put a raise into coming into the pot. Again, remember, button, 25 big blinds, chip EV. Now, this on the right is near the money bubble. Same 25 big blinds, same button, but look what changes. We start to remove some of these more speculative hands that can be more vulnerable, and we completely eliminate limping altogether. So you see 2s and 3s are gone here on the right. You see ace deuce no longer is a limp. It is half the time a raise. And then you start seeing a lot of these perimeter hands here and here start to disappear from being played. That's because, again, remember, at 25 big blinds, you have a likelihood of getting it all in by the river. So what you need to do is you need to play better hands that have better value that you're going to realize your value from. And that's basically how you're going to study each one of these stack depths, also based off of what phase of the tournament that you are in. Remember, the biggest pay jumps are going to come at the final table. That's when your ICM values start to change these hands very drastically. So let's jump into an example to put context to this, right? So if we're going to carry this ace queen of spades at 50 big blinds throughout the entirety of the presentation here. So let's say you're in middle position, right? And you determine that you're going to raise between 2.1 to 2.3 big blinds. And your balance range from middle position, you know your value hands are going to come from ace jack suited, ace queen off, and 9s plus. Like this is where your value range come in. I remember, since we're at 50 big blinds, you can start to put in some of these suited connectors. So you're going to raise things like 7-6 suited, the 8-7 suited, plus things like that. You start to remove these at 50 big blinds when ICM starts to come into play. And we explained that in the previous slide. Now, your bluffs and getting better board coverage are going to come from your king 9 of spades, or your king 9 suited, your queen 9 suited, your jack 9 suited, your 10-9 suited. These start to go away when you start getting, as stacks start to shrink and you start getting closer to the ICM bubble. Now, another thing to consider, and this is where having this good foundation, when people start to 3-bet you, they're going to start to attack these ranges and have you identify whether or not you have one of these hands or not. Now, they're going to get folds from most of your bluff and board coverage type of hands, or some of your suited connectors. And when you're out of position, let's say the button decides to 3-bet you here, you're going to wind up continuing with most of your value hands. Now, if you understand, like now that you understand why you have some of these hands in here, you balance this out where people don't quite know exactly what you have. And you do want to start to avoid getting 3-bet too light, because you're starting to open kind of junky hands like, let's say, ace deuce off or king 9 off, which have a tendency to be either very dominated by post flop play or are going to be even harder to continues against more aggressive opponents. So you do need to make sure that you're kind of balancing your equity and your calling range. For instance, in this example, like ace queen suited it has around 60% equity against, let's say, the big blinds flatting range, which would be twos plus, ace deuce plus, ace deuce suited plus, like the king nines plus, queen tens plus. So as you start to understand what your actual hand versus your opponent's range is, you can start really kind of narrowing down how to balance out your play, but also how you should be starting each one of these hands. This is considered GTO, this type of approach, because when you have strong hands and even some suited connectors in there, it gets hard for your range to get exploited. But you're also going to wind up folding out or dominating kind of those speculative hands that the blinds are going to continue with, like, let's say, an ace deuce off, or what was the other hand that I said? I think it was like king nine off, things like that. Your range will have a tendency to dominate their range. So you're creating a more advantageous position for you to be in and continue with. So again, I wanted to show you guys at this exact same stack depth of 50 big blinds. As you see here, this is chip EV that also includes limps. And then this one is ICM near the bubble. Both of these are in the low jack position, which is kind of a middle position that is demonstrated by the example we gave in the hand. And it's the differing range that you're going to see that you're opening at near bubble stage with, this one is 20 big blinds, and then this one is the same position, scratch that. It's 50 big blinds here, 20 big blinds here. This is chip EV, and then this one is ICM near the bubble. And you can see just how different these ranges vary. And it becomes a lot more value heavy and important knowing that in preflop at 20 big blinds, you're probably going to wind up getting it all in, but 50, you're going to have more post-flop playability and flexibility. So here you got twos plus, you got some of these suited eights, you have all of the offsuit tens here, and you could even start, they're relatively the same here. But then you also take out ace five, which has a tendency to be dominated. Here you actually add it in as a full open. But you start taking out some of these other speculative hands that you're set mining with, which you're only going to hit, I think it's between 12 to 16% of the time you'll ever hit a set, which is not very high percentage. And less likely or more likely to be against a hand, let's say if the big blind continues with 6-7 and you have 5-5 and 6 hits on the flop, you're more likely to get dominated with a speculative hand. That's why with each one of these ranges at each stage, you have to be aware on how to balance your play and what ranges you should be playing ideally, so you can't get exploited and you're always in an advantaged position pre-flop. Now that we've discussed that ace-queen suited hand pre-flop, let's talk about how to continue on the flop and what you do with each range betting. So let's say you raised 2.2 big blinds pre-flop, and the flop comes out. Remember, we've got ace-queen of spades. And the flop comes out, king spades, 9 of diamonds, 2 of clubs. And the player that you're up against is the big blind. Now, this here is the big blind range, continue range, versus your ace-queen suited. So the big blind is going to just call with most of these hands. They're going to try to re-raise you with some of these hands. And let's say they just called. That's going to narrow their range down to these things that you see in the green, and the unbalanced players are only going to flat you with most of this stuff, which you're going to see a lot of. Remember, we're at 50 big blinds here. So when the board comes out, King 9 deuce, the first thing you need to do is start asking yourself some questions. Whose range does this board favor? Take a look real quick. Who has the most kings in their range? Who has the most higher straight draws? Like, are you the one that's going to be raising with the queen tens or the queen jacks? Are you going to be the person that has most of the ace kings, the king queens? Or would your opponent? Take a look at their range. Think through what your starting range would be. And who would this board favor? Who is going to, by the end of all of this, potentially have either the nut advantage or the range advantage? Most of the time, if they haven't 3-bet you with most of this and they're continuing just with the green, this board is going to favor you. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to continue with a continuation bet. And GTO usually bets between 20 to 33% of the pot. And you're going to do that with your strong hands, your actual strong hands. So take ace queen suited out of the scenario. You're going to want to go ahead and continuation bet with like ace king or king queen or aces. Now, you're going to have some semi bluffs that you want to continue with. And those are the things like I just described, like queen jack or the ace queen suited that we're talking about here that has the potential to improve along the way or even be the best hand. And this could continue to improve along the way if it goes runner, runner, spade for the backdoor flush, or one of your overs hits, or one of the straight cards winds up hitting on the turn and on the river, and you wind up making the nut straight or the biggest straight possible. That's the reason why some of these bigger hands are good candidates for bluffing with. Then you have some of your semi-bluff that are connected inside of here. So let's say that you decided to continue, you had Jack 10 suited. This comes out, you're going to have equity. Let's say it's Jack 10 of spades or Jack 10 of diamonds. You could run out diamond, diamond. You could run out queen ace. You could run out queen 8 and potentially hit really big hands. So you could even bluff here. You do want to be careful because this can get exploited, especially if, let's say, the opponent who would have king, look at this, king 9 off would be in their range. So these are the hands that you want to be a little bit more careful with. Let's bring up another example here. Now, let's say that you have ace queen of spades, but instead of in this scenario where the king of spades comes out, the 7 of spades comes out. I want you to think through, in this example, who now does this board favor? Who's going to have most of the continues? Remember, they're going to be re-raising you with most of this red stuff here. But look at some of these hands that have the continue here. You're going to start seeing a lot of these like 10 5s and 9 6s and 9 5s. So the likelihood of them having middle pair or even backdoor straights start to go up because these are lower cards. Something to kind of like chalk this into an easier to remember range is anything that's 10 plus is going to favor you. Any kind of ace you have to be a little careful with because a lot of what you continue with and what they continue with are going to kind of be in that ace range, but you have a tendency to, when you're in position, to have a more dominant ace unless they're continuing with, like, let's say ace deuce here. That's an ace. That is more likely to end up in their range, less likely to end up in your range, the ace deuce or the two pairs there. So these are just some considerations. Yes, this can get complex, but if you just boil this down to asking these few questions as to whether or not you should bet or not, whose range does this board favor? Consider what their range might be. Who has the range and who has the nut advantage? And consider their range versus your actual hand or even your range. So some of it, if you want to play more of a balanced GTO range on this board, overpair you might want to continue with. In fact, it's probably best to continue with some of your overpairs. So jacks plus or tens plus, you're probably going to continue on this board. And under pairs that could potentially make some backdoor straights. Let's say you have 8s here. It's a decent hand. It merges a little bit with their range, so sometimes you might want to bet, sometimes you don't want to. It's really dependent on how big your stack is, how big your opponent's stack is, what kind of pressure you think you're going to be under with ICM, and those considerations. Some of the semi-bluffs or some of the checks that you can leave in to balance your range and potentially even extract value on a later street, which need less protection. Aces and kings, they need a little bit less protection, but you do want to bet them most of the time. But you do have some checks, especially if you're holding, like let's say the ace of spades and the ace of diamonds. You have the likelihood of being able to block some of what their backdoor flushes might become. Also, things that you might want to check are going to be some of these overpair that you can continue with. I'm sorry, not overpair, but over cards that you can continue with, since you've most likely already been checked too. You could continue and potentially hit like your ace king, your ace jack, your queen king jack on the turn. Or if one of those bigger cards hits, you don't have anything from it, you've already checked, you can actually bluff those candidates on the turn. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But some of your semi-bluffs are going to be if you've raised with, let's say, 10-8 suited or 10-8 offsuit. Again, ace queen of spades, you still have that backdoor draw to the flush. Betting, you probably want to balance it out. Do it about 50% of the time, maybe less. But this board definitely favors the big blind. So these are the ones that you're going to have fewer continues on, but talk it out. Know whose range it favors, who has a range of nut advantage, and where you might be in the hand. This is how we start implementing GTO and become unexploitable pre-flop or on the flop. Now we've talked about the flop, let's jump into the turn. So on the turn here, you're really deciding whether or not you want to continue barreling or if you want to check. Most of our barrels are if we've picked up equity and have the potential to make the nuts. We're barreling because we're still kind of bluffing and looking to take it down, or we're trying to get more value and discourage somebody from continuing to draw, or we're looking just to shut the hand down right then and there. So let's say the 6 of spades comes on the turn here, right? This makes the board king of spades, 9 of diamonds, 2 of clubs, 6 of spades. And remember, you've got ace of spades, queen of spades. Again, the opponent is in the big blind. We've now narrowed down most of their continues to be this range here. And now that you also see that range and you've started to narrow this down, I actually did not include, since we have the ace of spades removal, they are probably not going to continue here with any of their suited aces or unsuited aces that don't interact with this board. Obviously, because the spade got there, if they continued with, let's say, a suited ace of diamonds or a suited ace of clubs that doesn't have a king, they're probably going to wind up folding here. And we're going to target some of those hands with our bets, right? So how do you determine who has a range advantage? Now, remember this, nut advantage, it's all the way us. The pure equity of our hand, we potentially can hit the nuts on the river by hitting a spade. There's no question. There's no straight flush draw out there. There's no other hand that could beat us if another spade peels off. We're drawing to the nuts here. But some of the hands that your opponent could continue with would be things like, let's say, it's not likely because we block with it with the queen, but queen 10, queen jack, things like 7-8 of spades could even get in there, right? Those are some of their continues that they have. So you want to bet on some of your semi-bluff hands anywhere between, I know this says 70, but we could make this 50 to 70% of pot with things like your nut flush draw, with overpair. So if I had aces here, I'm definitely betting about 70% of pot to deny equity and get value, deny equity to draws and get value from some of this. And you're targeting some of these worse hands. But King 10, if they have King 10 and you have aces, you want to get value from it. If they have King Queen and you have aces, you want to get value from it. Again, because they've probably checked back. Let's say they do have something like King 9 and you still have your continues. You want to leave them in. So you have the potential of stacking them off by the river. You could bet 50, maybe even 75% of the pot. And if they're not savvy enough to come back over the top to deny your equity, they might just call back as opposed to jam. So some of the hands that you might want to check with on this board when it peels are some of the hands that you might have bet but are continuing with that could potentially get weaker but still kind of block. And we're talking like hands like 10s and 8s, because on 10s, if they continue with, let's say, some kind of like raggy king, let's say King 5 or even King 6, which is definitely in their range, you could be dominated, but they're going to play a little bit smaller, so you want to keep this smaller because they could be up against a dominating king. Also, a hand like 8s, it's just very vulnerable where they could be playing something like 10-9 or Jack-9 inside of here and checking back the 8 or even your weaker gut shot draws. Let's say this is King Jack offsuit or Queen Jack offsuit that does not have a potential to make the flush. You want to check these two and get a free card to potentially hit your straight on the river. One thing I do want you to note, the 6 could be ideal for 2-pair for your opponents and some of their straight draws. So taking that in consideration, this is something on our range and on that card potentially improving your opponent's range. So take into consideration when you're going to check or bet. And this is how we start ranging down what your opponent has, reading, but playing a more GTO style. Last but not least, we get to the river. River peels off. We brick out. We completely miss our flush, and it comes the Jack of clubs, right? So the board is now reading King 9, 2, 6, Jack, rainbow. No possible straight, no possible flush. What is that? Queen 10 just got there. The likelihood of them having it is actually pretty low because you have a queen blocker, which leaves them with only 3 potential queens that they could have in their hand, which makes it less likely, right? So again, we're going to ask those questions. When that Jack hits, who has the most straights in their hand here? Considering your hand, you block the high side Broadway. You also block the middle Broadway or the middle straight draw. So who has more of the range advantage and more of the nut advantage? You do need to be selective when the opponent is capped. So take, for instance, if they've checked back both check call, they probably have either a really huge hand that they were drawing to, or they're capped with just like a middle mediocre pair, and this could be a very big very big scare card. With you having the blockers, this might be a really good hand to get in there with, let's say, a 70 to 100% bet pot. But you have to really balance out how often you're doing it. Here in this spot, about 30% of the time you're going to want to bluff, and about 70% of the time you want to be betting for value. That way you're balanced out. And some of your check give up hands are going to be some of the things that you have a little bit of it. You have a little bit of showdown value. Let's say I just so happen to have continued with Queen Jack and I just got there with a Jack. I'm probably going to want to check back and not blow myself off the equity if they check again. But if they check for a third time, this would be a decent candidate to bluff. But again, you don't want to overdo this. Now, if you were out of position and let's say you just hit 2 pair from the big blind, if the big blind suddenly leads out with like a 20 to 40% block bet, their most likely bet there is going to be some kind of like weird 2 pair hand or something that might have just gotten counterfeited with the straight. So, they're going to put out a 20 to 40% of the pot bet so they don't get raised off of it with something like, let's say, King 9 or even like Jack 9 that was still drawing. Hands like that, you have to be careful because I've even seen people with sets do this, trying to protect like a low set. Maybe they had a set of 2s and they just don't want to get blown off of it. When somebody puts in a block bet, you have to determine whether or not they're really good at being a GTO balanced player and they're blocking, or if they're doing this because they're trying to get value and they don't want you checking back. Some of the merged hands that you have to consider here are the 2 pair hands, that the weird lower straights that just got there, like the Queen 10. Something that if you were betting big enough, they probably shouldn't have continued with, but didn't know better. But a lot of the 2 pair hands can get there too, and that's even in their range, like Jack 9. Jack 9's going to be, where do we have it? Right here. Jack 9 is going to be within that range, right? That's a part of their range that's made up. So is this a good bluff candidate or not? I'm going to let you make the determination. So we've talked through how to play a GTO style, what to consider, how to question it. I do want to talk through at each stack depth how you need to make changes in your ranges. At the short stacks, you want to be more aggressive and have more aggressive all-ins. You're going to use your stack kind of like a weapon. But your range needs to be a little tighter, a little more narrow, and it needs to be value heavy. You're looking for calls. You're looking for things that are going to have really good showdown value, and people with a little bit larger stacks are going to call off a little bit lighter, thinking that you're overplaying, and boom, you wind up doubling up and getting out of the short stack zone and into the mid stack zone, which is very important. Here, you have more range flexibility. You can, once you get above 20 big blinds, you can start to add in, let's call this 21 big blinds. You can start to add in suited connectors. I prefer it like 25 plus, but you can start to add in some of like the suited connectors, and you can start to add in some of the non-suited aces like the ace 5 off into some of your later position ranges. And you can also start 3-betting for some value and throw in some 3-bet bluffs that have removal, like let's say King 5 suited or Ace 5 suited, various hands like that remove a Broadway card but then still have the potential to have good board coverage and potentially make a really big hand. Those are really good 3-bet bluff candidates. Also, when you get into deep stack play, you have to think towards more post-flop play. You're going to most likely see turns and rivers a lot more often when you're 50 big blinds deep. This is where bringing in some of the more speculative gapped suited connectors might play out pretty well. You do want to emphasize position, and post-flop skill becomes super important. I even recommend, if most people want to learn how to play post-flop, get into tournaments very, very early. You're going to see a lot of limps. You're going to see a lot of multi-way pots, but you're going to have the capability of getting all the way down to the river and understanding how to talk through ranges, build and construct ranges, merge them down, and understand based on the dynamics of hand reading your range versus what your opponent's range might be, where you are in the hand. And doing so to get that post-flop playability skill, which is crucial when it comes to certain points, especially when you start getting to final tables and you're navigating a lot more spots, multi-pot or multi-street. You do still want to balance some of your value and your bluffs, but you need to be more selective with your bluffs because remember, usually when you're deeper stacked here, you want to keep deep stacked. Your job isn't to bust everybody at the table. It's to progressively and slowly chip up, putting some pressure on some of those middle stacks that are scared that they need to, that you can bust them, but kind of leaving alone some of those smaller stacks that are looking to get it all in and double up. So here's your homework on how to put this together. And most important, you need to know pre-flop ranges. So for the first week, I want you to take whatever stack size you have the most difficulty with inside of a tournament and just start there from each of the positions. You want to start, let's say 15 to 25 big blinds, right? Let's start with your biggest issue is raising under the gun with this or knowing how to play from the cutoff and the button. And those are the only two spots that you're going to look at, both chip EV and ICM. And you're just going to study these. And what you want to do is you want to take and study the perimeter of the range and what it chops down to as the stack size starts to disappear or you get in from chip EV to ICM. And don't do anything more than that. Just drill it for the entire week. Then, once you feel comfortable there, and you don't have to do this week by week, but week 2, cut the number of tables that you're playing down to 1 to 2. In fact, you know what? You probably should do this. We're going to do this even in week 1. We're going to do this every week. So you're cutting the number of tables that you're playing down to 1 to 2 so you can start to implement these strategies a lot better and a lot easier. This time on week 2, what you're going to do is you're going to record yourself talking through the GTO mindset questions. And remember, these are the questions. What range or whose range does this board favor? Who has a range and nut advantage in this situation? And then what you want to do is you want to act accordingly. You want to act and bet based on who has a range advantage and who has a nut advantage. Not based on your actual hand, but the range that you could have or the range that your opponent could have. And watch, you're going to start taking down a few more pots. You're going to start balancing out your value. And you're also going to start being able to make it a little bit cheaper and a little bit further along with some of your bigger draws too. And this is how you balance out your bluffing frequency with your value bet frequency. And your opponent's not going to know which one you have because you're betting relatively the same size on your semi-bluff draws, on your overpair, on your top pairs. And you're keeping your opponent guessing every step of the way. Then, once you've mastered this, let's go to your third week. And you're going to keep your tables at 1 to 2, but you're going to look more for opportunities to semi-bluff or all-out bluff. And this is just where your range is favoring you. And you're only looking for bluffs because you've already kind of memorized ideal ranges. You've already memorized the way to talk through these hands. Now you can start to open up your game a little bit more and look for better opportunities because you're starting with good ranges. You're making better decisions Now you can really start to implement bluffs, but don't overdo it. You're looking for good points. Do you remove some of what they can continue with and have the nuts on? Do you have the range way over the range advantage? Let's say it comes out king, queen, 4, and you have, let's say, ace, jack, and your opponent, you have your opponent way covered. You have the board coverage with a gut shot. Is this a really good semi-bluff candidate? You could get there with the 10 hitting some later street, or even one of these, even hitting your ace on one of these boards. Is this a good semi-bluff candidate? Is this a good all-out bluff candidate?
GTO is going to give you that balanced approach that you need to know where you are every step of the way in the hand and balance out your value with your bluffs. I hope this really sinks in, that you go through and do the homework as designed out. Again, I want to remind you, click that link. I have the homework down below. Make sure, if you haven't already, like and subscribe, but jump into the Discord group and talk about what you're doing after you've introduced yourself and followed the welcome. Talk about where you're at inside of your homework and what support you need from it. You could even bring hands in. Remember to create a thread. You'll see how to do that inside of the hand history or study hand review, and how everybody is sorting it inside of the Discord group. Get in there and start really putting in the work on how to implement GTO into your style of play and get coached on it inside of the Discord group. We have some crushers in there. In fact, I'm probably only one of the middle players inside of this entire group. I'm the one with the most, I think of everybody, I'm the one with the most coaching experience, but these guys have crusher experience at stakes that are insane. We have some really amazing players, and we all get better together. You're welcome to the group. Jump in, add value, and can't wait to see you in there. And I will also see you in part 3 when we start talking about population exploits, deviating from GTO, but you got to get GTO down first before you can even do this. Alrighty guys, see you guys in the next video and in the Discord group. Talk soon.